So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for a further webinar in Landor's Public Transport Recovery webinar series. I know this continues to be an incredibly busy time for transport teams around the country, and particularly for English authorities who I know are digesting BSIT news this week. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank you. My name is Jonathan Hampson, and I am the head of UK partnerships at VIA, which means I spend my time working with local authorities around the country, talking to them about their public transport networks and the very significant challenges that exist within them. I've been at VIA for approaching 2.5 years now, and before that I worked for a car sharing organisation where I was for 13 years. So it's fair to say that I believe very passionately that the future has to be shared, and in the power of technology to help make that a reality. Today's webinar is on the topic of digital demand responsive transport and how this can work as a fully integrated part of a wider bus network. Joining me today is Adele Wearing, who is the strategic lead passenger transport at Milton Keynes Council. Between us, we will aim to give you two perspectives, myself from a provider's point of view, really talking about the case for DDRT and how network integration is possible. And then Adele will give the local authority perspective and talk about what they've done in Milton Keynes and how it's gone so far. After we've both presented, I'll open it up to questions. So anything you want to ask, either Adele or myself, please use the Q&A function that you'll see down in the bottom right-hand side of the bar. And as I say, we will try and get to as many questions as we can come the end of the session. So with that, I will kick off my presentation. And I'm going to start a little bit by introducing VIA and what we're trying to achieve. So on the next slide, VIA's vision is to be the digital infrastructure that connects everything that moves across our community. For too long, transport services have been underinvested in from a technology standpoint and have sat often in silo from each other. Through technology, we believe we have a huge opportunity to help make public transport more compelling for users and more efficient for providers. Now, on to the next slide. And we now have a fully integrated end-to-end solution for every aspect of public mobility. This starts on the left-hand side with our with planning and our Remix product. And a few weeks ago, the first webinar that we did was done by my colleague, Sean Floyd, and he presented on the power of Remix. But for those who missed it, Remix is a probably a collaborative decision-making tool for street design, transport planning, scheduling, and mobility management for all shared and active modes. It enables a local authority to really simply plan and optimize transport in their area. So for English authorities who are getting to grips with enhanced partnerships, it's now allowing them to visualize their full network, both commercial and supported services, to analyze where the gaps are and how they might be able to fill them. A number of authorities also use Remix to support their BSIP submissions. And so there's some really nice data visualization capability in there to show demographics and be able to get the best possible view of what's going on in your area. With our streets product, authorities can do really easy street design for things like active travel projects. Often this is used at the earliest ideation stage and to enlist feedback before more detailed work, design work can then be done. All Remix products allow very easy collaboration and consultation. It's a fully online platform, so you can share links with other stakeholders, whether it be bus operators, whether it be other parts of the council to enlist feedback, or use it with members of the public to ask for their feedback and consultation. On the right-hand side is our operations software, and VIA now powers a really wide variety of services around the world, from DRT, which we'll obviously talk more about today, to dial-a-ride services, to home-to-school services. We also provide strategic advice with our in-house consulting team. So VIA really does aim to support local authority partners in a very, very holistic way, allowing them to plan, operate, and continue to improve their networks and services all within the same system. Next slide. And we really do believe that this should be an ongoing cycle of planning, operating, and optimizing. So it starts off with planning, and Remix helps you see what's going on in your community, what's missing, and design new schemes to create better outcomes. With VIA, you can then bring those plans to life, whether it be DRT, school services, as I've just said. And in the VIA system, one of the big light bulb moments that local authorities get is the level of data that they generate. Who is traveling? When are they traveling? Where are they going to? And with this level of data, you can then feed it back into Remix to create a virtuous cycle of ongoing optimization and better, more efficient services for your residents. Next slide. So that is what we do, and this is where we do it. We work with over 500 partners in over 40 countries, and we're a team of about 1,000 strong around the world. While we often look at some of these kind of digital services as something that's quite new, the reality now is that they are being deployed at scale around the world and are an entirely normal part of the way transport is delivered in a vast amount of settings. Far more interesting, though, is perhaps our presence in the UK. So as we'll see on the next slide, we now have a very significant presence around the UK, and we have 31 different services with 17 different partners across the UK. We've just launched our 12th service zone in Wales, in Ruthin, as part of our Flexi scheme in partnership with Transport for Wales. We also power more urban schemes like in Coventry with Transport for the West Midlands, and incredibly rural schemes like Tees Flex in the North East, or like Moorlands Connect in the Peak District. Both in the UK and around the world, each one of these schemes that you see here on this slide is incredibly different, and each one is individually designed to work in its local circumstance and to meet the very, very different challenges that each partner has. This is not just an off-the-shelf technology that you apply to any setting in a one-size-fits-all. It is far from that, with many, many configurations and options that we will work through with each partner to make sure this scheme will work for them. To do that, and launching and supporting these schemes in the UK, we have a team of about 20 on the ground, covering each discipline, from my team that works with authorities up front to establish the need and to design schemes, to then our launch team, who will then take that scheme and work with the local authority to bring it to life and make it a reality on the ground. And then finally to our partner success team, who play a hugely vital role after the scheme is launched, working with partners to ensure through the full life of the project that it continues to meet their goals as they evolve, as they learn more about the scheme and how it's performing. So on to the next slide. If I've now covered the what and the where, and here is the why. And why do I believe so strongly in digital demand responsive transport? The answer in some ways is very simple. We have to get people back onto public transport, and we're going to need fresh solutions to help us do that. Even before the pandemic, public transport patronage was in decline in the vast majority of areas. And the reality is that we just aren't doing a good enough job of tipping the balance in favor of shared mobility over private mobility, not even close. You aren't short of data points to back this up, but the Campaign for Better Transport's latest research was timely this week. 27% of bus services by mileage have been cut over the past 10 years. I'm pretty sure I'll be preaching to the converted on this call when I say why this is important. And apologies, this is often, I can get a little bit ranty. I'm sorry for getting any feedback on my microphone. I'm not quite sure why, but fingers crossed it's okay. But the reasons why I hope are relatively obvious. A lot is said about levelling up, and how can we do or claim that we're levelling up our country when there's still such a larger proportion that are completely consigned to car dependency, due to poor public transport access. We have a major congestion issue in our cities, with congestion now above where they were in pre-pandemic levels. And while large electrification initiatives are entirely correct and a part of the solution, in itself, they will not solve our problems. Only if we can get to shared and electric will we be able to do that. We have a climate crisis. Off the back of COP26, this was our time to show leadership in the fight against climate change. Yet we continue to prioritize initiatives that favor the private motorist over public transport. And signaling is really important. In the last 2 weeks, we've seen 5p taken off fuel duty in a step that will cost the Treasury 2.4 billion, while having a fairly negligible impact on motorists, and particularly those on the lowest income levels. But fast forward to this week, and we've seen local authorities in England get the news that their BSIP funding allocations attached to the National Bus Strategy have shrunk a long way from the 5 billion that was first announced in September 2019 to 1.08 billion committed to only 31 authorities. Now, perhaps this is an oversimplification, and I'm well aware that there are other funding packages that have been granted, but the optics of it aren't good. And I know there will be a lot of very disappointed local authorities on the call today. And all of this when the economics of investment in transport are so strong. We limit our economy if we do not provide people the basic ability to access local jobs and local services. And to say this quote from the UN, I think sums it up quite nicely. And on to the next slide. And as I've said before, this is not something that's new or revolutionary. DDRT is now in action on a mass scale around the world and in some very, very different use cases. It's active in the urban environment with schemes like our Berlkönig service in partnership with the BVG in Berlin. In this case, it provides a valuable role in filling the gaps around the fixed route network and in providing coverage at night when the demand for public transport is lower. It can also play a really valuable role for the less able, ensuring that they can access public transport anywhere within the city. And in the more suburban environment, DRT arguably has an even larger role to play as a complement to the fixed route network, as there will be more places and more times where the commercial network will not be able to take the strain, and therefore where DRT can provide coverage and accessibility into the core network. And it can often do so in a more cost-effective, more compelling way than lots of subsidized fixed routes. Our MK Connect service that Adele will go on to talk more about is a good example of exactly this kind of use case, where it replaced all of the supported fixed route services with one fully integrated DRT service. So wherever you are in Milton Keynes and wherever you want to go, you can do it by bus, which is surely what we should be aspiring to. Finally, there is the rural use case. And this is certainly the one that's got by far and away the most traction in the UK, as regular services have been cut back. Here, DRT can be really, really effective at providing transport access to areas that lack the population density for fixed route buses. So by providing DRT, you can provide access to employment, to services, as well as to the core transport network. And our Flexi service in rural Wales is a great example of this. In each of these services, though, you'll have heard me say how DRT needs to complement the existing network. And to do this, it's absolutely vital that DRT doesn't sit in isolation, but it integrates coherently with the rest of the network. And I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about how you can ensure that integration. On to the next slide. Before I do that, though, it must be acknowledged how hard we make it to present a coherent transport network to passengers here in the UK. While each country has their challenges, and I wouldn't say that any country around the world is nailing public transport, it is difficult not to look across the world with a little bit of envy at some systems that are inherently joined up, because the public transport authority is responsible for all elements of provision. And then look at the UK, where almost the opposite is the case. And it feels a very, very tough ask in 2022 and beyond to expect newly formed enhanced partnerships to solve the kind of broken, fragmented system that arguably bus deregulation has given us. A system that is fragmented between transport modes, fragmented between operators, each with their own ticketing regime, and fragmented between the commercial and non-commercial parts of the network. But just because there are inherent challenges, on to the next slide, doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for a significantly better integration with DRT into the broader transport network. And this is something that's entirely possible and highly desirable. There are many, many different flavors of integration, and I'm going to give a few examples of what is possible. The first one is what we call multimodal integration, and it allows users to view multiple modes of transport in the VIA-powered app and to propose the most efficient way of getting from A to B. The most common modes we integrate into our services in the UK is obviously the fixed route bus network, and Milton Keynes is a good example of this. When we launched MK it was absolutely paramount that the service complemented the commercial network rather than competed against it. By integrating through the GTFS feed, we can give passengers now the most appropriate proposal for the trip that they want to do. If a commercial fixed route service is capable of doing the trip, then this is what you will see a proposal for. And the middle image on the screen here shows just that. And you will see walking directions to get to the bus stop, as well as details of when that bus service is due to arrive. Only if a fixed route can't do the trip, like the image on the right-hand side of the three, will they then get a DRT proposal and be able to do that. And I'll give more details in a second of how you can create rules that dictate when you get each type of proposal. But the outcome is that wherever you are in Milton Keynes, you can do your trip by bus. The next example is actually very similar and is also, onto the next slide, is also from here in the UK, and that's Sevenoaks. And very similar multimodal integration in our Go-To service. In this case, it's slightly different. All the services in the area are supported. So the one difference between this one and the MK Connect service is that sometimes passengers will get both a DRT option and a fixed route option. So in the grey area where they might be able to take both services, but perhaps the fixed route option is 25 minutes away, you will then give the passenger the option. Do they want to take the DRT option, or do they want to take the fixed route option? So again, the solution is very similar. A GTFS integration, both the fixed route network and DRT can be presented as options to the passenger, with the passenger given the most appropriate proposal for the trip that they want to do and be able to choose between those two. Next slide. Both of these are examples of how we can filter proposals based on a criteria chosen by the partner. And I said earlier that all VIA schemes are very, very configurable. And this is an example of how we would work with a partner to design a scheme that worked for their particular challenges and in their particular context. So we can create, it's a rules-based system as to how you show different proposals to the user. So you can either create relative rules. So I only want to show a DRT proposal if it's X% quicker than a fixed route proposal. Or I can create an absolute rule or a set of absolute rules. So don't show a DRT option if there is a fixed route bus stop within 300 meters coming, 300 meters, and there is a bus coming within 30 minutes. Or you can create absolute rules like Anyone that has registered with an additional mobility need will only ever be shown a DRT proposal. And as I say, you can see on the screen, there's lots of different quality criteria that we can apply to create these rules. So we'll sit down with the local authority and tailor something that makes sense to their circumstance and their particular challenges. So on to the next slide, there's the next form of integration that we have in our services is what we call intermodal integration. And in this case, not only are we showing multiple modes within the VIA powered app, but we are showing a combination of DRT and these additional modes to get someone from A to C. So it could be you put in your start point and end point, and they will have a combination of modes that will get them to that end state. So a good example, just to bring this to life, is in our Moorlands Connect service in partnership with Staffordshire County Council. The council very much wanted to ensure that DRT provided a first and last mile connection from the very rural Moorlands area into the fixed route network and the commercial fixed route network, so they can carry on with their onward trip. So through a GTFS integration, again, you can see a combination of ways that you can get to your endpoint. So that might be, I need to take DRT for the first leg of my trip. I will then connect in with a fixed route bus to take the remainder of my trip to get to the end destination. And through the VIA powered app, you will see a full trip itinerary of how you'll do that. So you'll see the legs of the trip. So details of the DRT journey, details of the fixed route journey. You'll see pricing information, the arrival and departure time of each leg of your journey, how far you might need to walk to get to the bus stop for perhaps the second leg of your journey. So this one is a more involved integration. So where in multimodal integration, it's either you'll be, for your trip, be taking DRT or a fixed route. With this kind of integration, you might be taking a combination of DRT plus fixed routes to do your trip. So on to the next slide. So far, we've only really talked about planning integrations and things that allow users to plan their trip. Obviously, to get a fully seamless transport experience, there are two other forms of integration that we offer our partners. And the first is obviously payment integration and allowing the user not only to pay with the usual forms of payment, such as cash or debit and credit card, and they will register those when the user signs up to the service, but also to allow them to pay with the same local transport card that they might do with other transport modes. And we have lots of examples of where we do just this, but one example from across the pond is with a partner, King County Metro in Seattle. They wanted to ensure that their DRT service was just like any other part of the public transport network. They have a very established local transport payment card called Orca. Think of effectively Oyster in London. And when through an API integration, when passengers sign up to the DRT service, which is called Via to Transit, they can also add in their Orca public transport card as a payment method and pay for all trips using that public transport card. So as I say, how to make sure that DRT and fixed routes are entirely joined up as a method of offering public transport. Obviously, ensuring that people can pay for trips in exactly the same ways is one way of doing just that. So that's the payment integration. The last, and on to the last slide, next slide. The last form of integration that that we offer and is required to make a seamless transportation system is obviously ticketing. And VIA already supports in a number of places around the world ticketing integrations. One example of this is in Cologne, in Germany, with our partner KVB, and they wanted a fully integrated ticketing solution so passengers could buy and use tickets across all of their public transport services, including DRT. So VIA now integrates into Cologne's ticketing solution, ensuring that passengers can buy and be issued tickets through a QR code in the VIA-powered KVB app. And these tickets will work across all services. Equally, when boarding the DRT vehicle, a passenger can use an existing ticket by scanning its QR code on a QR code reader within the vehicle. So again, one seamless public transport experience for the residents of Cologne. As I said earlier, onto the next slide. It's fair to say that creating this kind of seamless solution in the UK is a little bit more challenging. We have a fragmented, often getting passengers to be able to use the same ticket just between fixed route services can be quite challenging by the nature of the kind of fragmented system that we have. But there's still things that we believe are possible to make DRT sit seamlessly from a ticketing perspective into the fixed route network. And that's why we launched our partnership with Ticketer last year. And we will be launching the first service taking advantage of this Ticketer integration in the next month. Really a very, very similar user experience to what you just saw on the previous slide through KVB. So it will be a Ticketer issued QR code that will allow people to use the same ticket across DRT and any other ticketer service. So onto my last slide. So to sum up, I think it's fairly self-evident, I'm sure to everyone on the call today, that we have a huge challenge to reverse the trajectory that public transport has been on for some time now. And that if we're to do so, tinkering around the edges of the status quo simply isn't going to cut it. We need to be bold, and this is going to require new solutions as well as existing ones. I hope I've made the case for why DRT can be and should be a part of a toolkit of recovery, and with applicability across a very wide range of use cases. And I hope I've also been clear that DRT should never sit in isolation from the rest of the transport network, but instead integrate with it to form one cohesive solution for passengers. And my last point is really to urge authorities on this call to engage with providers. I know that bandwidth is hugely constrained, and I think it can often be daunted when there's a lot of people out there often writing a lot of emails. But I would say there is a huge amount of experience of what works and the art of the possible. And I know all providers are very happy to provide this for free and to talk about their experiences of what can work, what hasn't worked, and to co-create services with yourselves who will always know your local circumstances best. And that certainly starts with myself. So on to the last slide. Thank you very much. And if there is anything that we can support with, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And I will do my best to answer any questions that have come in through this at the end of the session. So with that, I'm going to pass on to Adele Wearing, who, as the slide says, is the Strategic Lead for Passenger Transport at Milton Keynes. Adele, over to you.
Morning. Thank you, Jonathan. We've got a nice picture of one of our vans up there, but I'm going to skip straight into the main slides. And you'll see quite quickly, I go for a fairly minimalist approach to my slides, but I talk lots, so we should be fine. So this first slide, really, it just sets out some of the issues we were facing and the picture in Milton Keynes back in 2020, when we were talking about whether or not to go ahead with this. We had fixed bus routes costing us almost 3 million. And as everyone will know, with the way things have risen, it would be substantially more than that now to have retained the same network. We financed around a third of the routes in Milton Keynes with less than 14% of the users. which was a reducing number. The graph to the side shows sort of how patronage had fallen in the run up to 2019. Large amount of Milton Keynes is rural, so there are big areas where commercial bus routes are probably never going to be viable unless they're significantly developed. And even in the urban and peri-urban areas of Milton Keynes, the approach for the area has always been low density building, lots of green space, estates looking in on themselves instead of out towards the grid roads. It's not an ideal setup for public transport from the beginning. And in there, so our rural areas are really, really challenging. We're not the norm in running, a third of our services as supported. And Jonathan's already referenced the sort of cuts in mileage. I think it's around 3,000 bus routes that have been withdrawn nationally in the last decade. There are significant cuts and have continued to be significant cuts everywhere. We've pushed back against that for a long time and continued to support these routes that were never going to be sustainable. And faced with that and faced with the increasing costs, we had to choose. Do we cut, take routes out completely, reduce service levels, hack away at the routes and just try and keep the best bits? Or do we do something really, really different? So we decided to try something different in Milton Keynes. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we've set up our initial thinking going into that. So these are some of the things we sat down and decided we wanted right at the beginning. It's not going to be a taxi. The Milton Keynes MK Connect system is a corner-to-corner provision. So we go around, it covers the whole borough, and it will take people from within 400 meters of where they are to within 400 meters of where they want to go. It's not running on existing or preset routes. But it's also not a taxi. It's not a door-to-door service that you can book in advance, determine exactly where you want to go, phone them up 3 days ahead and say, I want to go from, the Don Stadium to the train station at 6:15. It can only be booked on demand. So while there is a bit of a lead time and people need to consider that when picking their booking time, it works very much as an on-demand service. I want to travel. I need to be somewhere in an hour or so. I need to start thinking about booking. It doesn't compete directly with the commercial routes or with the private hire services. And we were really careful about this. We wanted to make sure that it was complementary to our commercial bus network, filling in the gaps, providing service for people who either hadn't been able to access fixed bus because there wasn't any, or couldn't access it because for their disability, it had become inaccessible. We wanted to push towards an electric fleet. So the fleet is 50-50 electric and diesel. Part of the reason we only went 50-50 at this point is the market for wheelchair accessible vehicles and electric is still quite new. And it hadn't really got to the point where we need it to be for this service level. It started at 18 vehicles. I think there's 26 on the service now, including 9 wheelchair accessible vehicles. We're running about 1,200 trips a day, and we've costed it at £3.50 per trip for peak and £2.50 off peak, which we felt was about comparable to single fares. And that was important to us. We wanted to make it fairly affordable. And on the next slide, I just give a little visual, really, of how the network has changed. To the left, we've got when we were supporting services, and to the right, we've got since MK Connect launched on the 1st of April last year. And you can see there are some quite significant gaps where there was nothing commercially running at all. And one of the things we said when we went to decision on this was, if we clear the decks, if we remove all of them, the reason we didn't want to cherry pick and just support some services, we wanted to make a really big, bold move, was if we can clear the decks and remove all of those supported services, we remove any cannibalization of existing fixed routes and we help them recover, which was going to be really, really important coming through COVID. And we create opportunities for operators to look at where there might be viable take up for a commercial service. And we've recently had 2 new commercial services registered. They're quite small. They are tentative at the moment because we are very much still in a recovery phase, but they are 2 new services, one of which is already very, very popular. So it's doing what we wanted it to do. It's providing a public transport option that's affordable for everyone in the borough to get anywhere if they can't get a bus. And the next slide, we talk a little bit about how we've integrated it, and you know, the integration with fixed routes was, I mean, Jonathan's gone over a lot of this, but the parameters we picked were things like, it has to be within 400 meters of a bus stop. Sorry, you have to be more than 400 meters from a bus stop to get it, unless you're disabled. You have to be waiting more than 20 minutes for a bus, and you have to have more than one reasonable change. And we did play around with the parameters for that change in the middle a little bit. So there really is, you know, they can change anything. The system can play around with all sorts of parameters to get the right balance. And we've currently got about 9,000 trips a month being pushed to bus. We do occasionally get phone calls from people saying, every time I try and use MK Connect, I get told to take a bus. And we're like, yes, that's how it's meant to work. We override that if you have accessibility issues. And we debated this long and hard. We have a WAV toggle on the app. So if you need a wheelchair accessible vehicle, you can select that yourself. We didn't want to cut people off from the system because they aren't diagnosed as disabled. They don't have medical proof of their disability. We took the view that, you know, there are quite a lot of people out there who won't get a diagnosis as disabled, but will struggle to carry all their shopping 400 meters uphill. So you can add an accessibility toggle to your account by phoning us and asking for it. And we've got it in broadly 3 categories. One is mobility, one is cognitive. So anybody with, you know, early signs of dementia, or some of our autistic riders actually do get a door-to-door service, or virtually door-to-door service, and they also get regular pickup points, so they know where they are. And the other one was for visual impairments. So we've tried to sort of, they're broad groups, but we've tried to meet the sort of the basic groups of people who might need that extra support. We have phone booking as well, and I noticed one of the questions that's already come through is about non-digitized people. You can phone our customer services line. We have a dedicated number for MK Connect, so they know when they pick up, and you get prioritized on the queuing system, that they're dealing with somebody who might want to book a ride, and they will tell you where your ride is picking you up. We have about 5% of bookings come through the phone. And of that, I think 1.4% of our users have only ever used the phone. A lot of people move between the app and the phone, of that cohort that likes to phone. It is on demand only. And from a council point of view, we get fantastic data. And again, I think Jonathan touched on this earlier. We get really, really detailed data about who's traveling, where they're going from and to, what the demand is in different areas, and the map to the right just shows a breakdown by ward of the demand. So you see there's, you know, fairly high demand everywhere. And we can see things like waiting times, walking distances. It's you know, we can see all of those parameters playing out in very nearly real time. And on the next slide, I've just picked out an average day, just to give a taste of what we can see really, really easily. The number of trips we completed, the number of riders that was. Met demand refers to the number of people who got a seat on their first time trying. We have a 10-minute window, so if you just hit refresh constantly for 10 minutes, you only get counted once. On the 11th minute, it counts you as a second seat unavailable. The KPI for that is 95%. The average pickup times and the average walk to pick up at the moment. So that's just an average day for a bit of flavour. And on the next slide, we're talking sort of just the categories of how people have reacted. So this is very much a me talking rather than information on the slide one. The graph shows our passenger journeys on public transport in the blue and orange. The orange is the DRT percentage, which is around 5% now. The grey is the 80% of pre-COVID, which is where we'd like to get back to in terms of recovery. So the passengers, how have the passengers reacted? Well, we didn't have a lot of run into this. We were in the middle of COVID, our contracts were ending, the decision was called in, and we didn't have a lot of time to get everything scrambled and live. We were really flexible, and we did get everything out on April 1st, 2021, which was a dangerous day to go live, I think. And we hit the ground running with that. So we'd gone out, we'd plastered the bus shelters, we'd done lots of press about it, lots of online social media about it. But obviously some people didn't pick it up until they got on, went to get on a bus and found the buses weren't running. We would have liked more lead-in time to do more outreach work, which we've continued to do since launching, but we'd have liked to have done more of that in the run-up, but it was lockdown, so that was challenging. Overall, passenger reaction's been really positive. We get a lot of 5- and 4-star reviews on the service. We get some really good feedback from people, particularly people within disabled communities who had been unable to use buses and were reliant on taxis. They've been really positive about the service, and it's given them a lot of freedom. There are pockets of people who have struggled with it, and obviously that's part of why we've continued to do outreach work. Some older people in particular, some of the rural village communities have pushed back and said, no, we want our bus back. And that's been an ongoing challenge. We're starting to see more of them coming across and using DRT. A lot of the people pushing back and saying we don't want it, it doesn't work, haven't actually registered and tried it. But it's changing buses is always an emotive subject. The bus operators have been fine. We've had no pushback from them. As I said previously, we've been able to demonstrate to them that we have been directing people to the bus, so we do publish that figure. We get weekly breakdowns on how many people are being pushed to the fixed bus routes, and we've worked with them on that as part of the ongoing work around the BSIP and the EP as well. PHV taxi drivers, the contract is actually run under PHV, so they are smaller vehicles. They're run on PHV licenses with PHV drivers. We did open, when we went out to tender, we opened it up to PSV or PHV. So the first response, we've not had much pushback from the taxi trade. There've been a couple of comments about us subsidising a preferred taxi supplier, which obviously isn't the case. And our response to that has been very simply, this went out to tender, it is a contract. You could have gone for it, So it is, it's been reasonably uncontroversial from that point of view. It has been mostly these small pockets of residents that haven't wanted to make the change or have struggled with the change that have been pushing back against the service. Overall, it's been really well received. And as I say, we're now on 1,200 trips a day, which I think is actually, pretty good. So what we're doing next, on the next slide. We're currently working, we've been taking ENCTS as a flash pass on it when we first launched it, because as I say, we had to launch fairly quickly. We didn't have time to develop a proper integration pre-launch. So we've been accepting ENCTS as a flash pass on the same basis as we accept it on the buses in terms of post 9:30 free travel. But we're currently working with our smart card provider to develop that integration so that the concessionary cards can be accepted on the VIA app. We are reviewing the trip parameters. We've got a reasonable amount of ride sharing, but it's not where we want it to be sustainable long term. So we're currently working with VIA on what to change and how much to change it in order to try and push those higher sharing rates. Do we lengthen the walk for people? Do we lengthen the waiting time? Do we increase the amount of time they can add to a journey in order to pick up additional people? All of those discussions are happening at the moment. And we're exploring options for inclusion in our multimodal offer. We have a fairly nascent multimodal ticket in Milton Keynes. It only recently moved over to the smart card, and it is only on bus operators at the moment. But we have begun the discussion with our bus operators about what a multimodal offer could look like on our currently multi-operator smart ticket. So there's a lot, those are sort of the key things. There's a lot of discussion going on about how we build on this moving forward, and how we make it more sustainable moving forward, and integrate it, even more deeply with the existing services. And wrapping up on the next slide, and I think there's plenty of questions coming in, so we'll work through those. It's been a lower cost, more sustainable model for us. It did reduce the cost from our original cost, about 2.9 million. It has reduced the cost from that. It's certainly costing us less than it would cost to continue to run the services we used to run, given the current increases. It's allowed operators to look at potentially expanding their services. As I say, we've had 2 registered already. There is discussion about another service at the moment. We're seeing continuing increase in usage, and overall satisfaction is high. We're really pleased with it. We think overall this is a successful service. It's not going to be perfect for everyone, but fixed buses aren't perfect for everyone, taxis aren't perfect for everyone. It does mean that there are viable options for pretty much everyone to get anywhere in Milton Keynes, and there are plenty of areas that even before we made our cuts didn't have access by public transport. And then I've wrapped up with just a quote from one of our fans, which is quite a nice one. And that's it. I think Jonathan's ready, we can get into the questions.
I am indeed, Adele. Thank you very much. I hope that was really useful to everyone. I'm sure it was. There was a huge amount of detail there and experience shared. So Adele, thank you. As you said, there are a lot of questions coming in. So, and I in particular talk for far too long. So I will do my best to get into them very quickly. We can run over a little bit. So for those who can stay on past 11 o'clock, we'll stay on for a few minutes to answer as many questions as we can. Equally, please don't hesitate to get in touch with either Adele or myself afterwards. We'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have outside this forum. So I'm going to start with the questions that have come into the Q&A box first. I know there's quite a few in the chat as well. So I'll go down the Q&A ones first and then dig into the chat afterwards. Imogen, you asked a couple of questions on how will the new technology address the needs of the digitally excluded? And there's kind of a related one on what actions do councils take to encourage the digitally unconnected to join in? I think Adele touched on this one. I think certainly from our perspective, we feel very, very strongly that all of these services need to work for everyone, no matter your level of digital adoption. I think we have seen through the pandemic a huge rise in the number of people who are digitally confident, but there will always be people who aren't. And so all of our services except phone bookings and everything that you can do through the web, you can through the app, you can also phone in and get a range of proposals from a call center who'll tell you when you can get automated messages about when the vehicle is going to arrive. So these services can absolutely work for everyone. And if you look at some of the passenger data on services like Flexi, actually it's some of the older demographics who have some of the highest satisfaction rates with the service. So I think I can say with some confidence that these services should and do work for people of all ages and digital adoption rates. Adele, do you want to add anything on that one?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, as I say, we've done some outreach with people to help them get comfortable with the app if they're just a bit they have access, they're just a bit uncertain how to use it. And we do have the customer services taking calls to support people with their accounts and other queries about the service, as well as to book rides. Out of office hours and at weekends, we use the vehicle centre for just booking rides.
Yeah, I think, as I say, the services that we have around the world vary hugely in terms of app booking rates, from some that, like Milton Keynes, I think 95% app booked, to others that are actually entirely the other way around. They're only 5% app bookings. We run a number of data ride services around the world. And often in those kind of services, it's a fairly small proportion of people who will choose to book through the app. So we're very much used to both, catering for both. But as Adele said, we'll also try and encourage and help people into more self-service bookings, because often that's what people want. They don't necessarily want to talk to a call center. It's just trying to help them make the most appropriate choice. Question sent in for Via: how do you determine the appropriate advance booking period for DRT services, i.e. how many days in advance can a passenger book a trip? To be honest, it's something that's entirely configurable. The service that Adele talked about is entirely on demand, so there's no pre-booking. It's you go into the app and you say, I want to travel now. We also have entirely pre-booked services, and we have services that are a combination of pre-booked and on demand. And trying to get to the right service and the right time period for advanced booking is something we'd sit down with a partner. From a technology standpoint, anything's possible, and even our advanced booking services, almost all of them, they allow bookings many weeks in advance, but also right up to often an hour before or even less. So it's trying to establish in a local circumstance what's the most appropriate for that local service. Question from Andrew Lindsay about DRT obviously has a role to play in rural Scotland. However, it's clear it will never be self-sustaining in this context. How do you think the shortfall should be funded? And how do you convince those sources of funding that DRT is the best option versus other available options? Adele touched a little bit on, from a Milton Keynes perspective. I think often, the vast majority of cases, DRT will not be a profitable service. I spend a lot of my time saying how important it is that we invest in public transport services. And so I think public transport should not be held to a bar of profitability. There's many, many other reasons that it should be provided. I gave some of those through the course of my presentation. So I think the business case for that investment is exceptionally strong. So it's working with partners to look at their local areas to what ways can we make the DRT service as efficient as possible. So it requires as small amount of subsidy as possible. So often that's looking at what other services are there in the local area that perhaps we can also join in with. So that could be, if a local area has a dialer ride service, could that be combined with the DRT service? So instead of needing two completely separate funded services, actually you can join them together and create funding efficiencies through that. It could be looking at employers who might be interested in helping their staff get to work without needing to bring the car into work. Is that an area of funding that could be useful? So I think we're very, very experienced at working with partners to try and lessen the financial impact of providing these kind of services. Adele, do you want to talk a little bit around how you found DRT as a kind of cheaper option while still needing subsidy versus fixed route provision?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question's absolutely right. It's not self-sustaining if you're using it in a rural environment. Milton Keynes, as I said, is largely rural, peri-urban. So we went into this knowing it would need to be a subsidised service. What we presented was basically, these are the costs of carrying on with all of the bus services we've got as fixed bus services. and those costs are increasing, or we can do something different, and this is what we think the cost of that looks like, and it is a lower cost. So they took sort of the saving and the complete coverage over partial coverage and spiraling costs. It's paid for in Milton Keynes partially through developer funding at the moment and partially through central council funds. So we do have a budget for it. And obviously we put out a contract on the basis that the contractor would keep any fare revenue as well to bring the costs down for us. But yeah, I think we have to accept that it's not always you can't always run a bus network that doesn't have any cost on a council. And the more rural you get, the more true that is.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Adele. Hopefully that's helpful. Adele, Keith Dove has asked, what's the significance of the different colours on Adele's from launch slide? I think it's the origin and destination map.
Ooh, let's have a look.
I think it was just splitting them out by ward.
Oh yeah, no, it was just the different wards. It was Milton Keynes is fully parish, so we have over 300 councillors to deal with one way or another, and there was a lot of interest in this. So we asked FIA to run us off a visual, because there were various people saying, well, we don't think anyone in our area is using it. So it's like, run us off a visual so we can show that actually people in every area are using it and break it down by ward. So that's all that is. The different colours are just the different wards. Otherwise, it is just a blur of blobs.
Yeah. Thank you. Kevin asked, does a certain number of people need to demand a service before it runs, or are single occupancy trips allowed? Kevin, very simple. Yes. Sorry, no, you don't need a certain minimum number of people. I think that would be pretty difficult to justify, that you can't do your trip just because no one else does. So normally we look at average utilization rates for trips, so how many people are aggregated together, but there will always be some trips where someone will be by themselves. So no, we don't enforce a minimum number of people for a trip to happen. Is the National Freedom Pass available on these services? Adele, I'm going to admit I don't know the answer to that one, so I'm going to come to you.
Who's running them in Milton Keynes, it's run under a PHV license, and although we opted to accept the English National Concessionary Scheme at our own expense, we don't accept the Freedom Pass. Other schemes may.
Thank you. Question from Keith, is it registered as a local bus service with the Office of the Traffic Commissioner? I presume yes, if you're accepting the NCTS, in which case does it not automatically come within the scope of Milton Keynes Plus Bus for bus rail ticketing?
MK Connect is not registered with the Office of the Traffic Commissioner because it's not registered as a PSV service. We made the choice as an authority that it would be very much outside of the spirit of the concessionary scheme to not accept it on these vehicles. So we've taken that hit. Great.
Is there a maximum distance passengers can travel on the Milton Keynes service? Adele, go for it.
It's border to border, so you can cross the whole of Milton Keynes from its furthest point to its furthest point, but you cannot cross outside it, which is an interesting challenge in Woburn Sands, where the Milton Keynes boundary runs right through the middle of the Woburn Sands boundary. So people move the pin to the other side of the boundary and get picked up at the nearest stop inside.
And I think that, again, it's one of those areas that you can create lots of rules as to where people can travel from and to. So sometimes you've got one zone, you can travel literally from anywhere to anywhere, like is the case in Milton Keynes. Sometimes you can create rules that say how the maximum distance. So you can have different zones, but you can travel within a zone, but not from one zone to the other. So T's Flex is an example where we've got multiple zones. So again, there's a lot of options that that people can have to make sure that the service works for their local challenges on mapping. How do I protect my operation against the increased level of fine particulates, especially in the busy polluted corridors and the increasingly onerous air quality legislation? James, that's a tough one. I think I'm going to say two very quick things. One is, there's some very, very good data that I'm happy to send to anyone around modal shift and getting people onto public transport. That is where the greatest benefit lies in terms of air quality. We've got to get people out of private cars and onto shared services. I would love to have more electric DRT services. Milton Keynes is part electric. We've just launched, as I said in my presentation, Ruthin with Transport for Wales. That is an electric service. We very much hope to have, from a technology standpoint, we fully facilitate electric DRT services, and we've got a number around the world, and I very much hope that more will come forward here in the UK as more vehicles become available. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I think let's get people onto public transport first and foremost. That's how we're going to help our air quality challenges, and I'd love to do it with the cleanest possible vehicles possible. John, have the 31 transport authorities who have BSIP funding been informed? Adele might be able to comment. Yes, they have. Yes. I believe they've got a letter one way or the other. Adele, you might, I'm sure there's lots of views on that.
The authorities who have not had BSIP funding have also been informed. I think the press release went out slightly before people got their letters, but we have all now had our formal letters either way.
What is the age limit for traveling alone, e.g. are school children allowed to use it?
This is,
go on.
Sorry, do you want me to take this from?
Yeah.
So this came up a lot in Milton Keynes because under the VIA terms and conditions, there is an age limit, which I think is 14, and it's to do with contract law. So that said, on the actual service, the principle is that if you are under 14, an adult should book for you, but you can ride alone. We've said that people shouldn't put anybody under sort of secondary school age on it alone. So we see the age limit really as 11 plus in practical terms. But yeah, there is a little bit more to it than that in the actual terms and conditions.
Yeah. I'm going to just take a last few. I'm really aware that we're not going to get to all of them, and I'm really sorry about that. But we will take a list of all the questions that have come in and try and write you follow-up responses for those that I haven't got to. So just the last couple that I can polish off very quickly. Adam asked, does DRT use existing bus stop infrastructure? It can do. I think we give partners a variety of options. Either you can have entirely virtual bus stops, so no physical infrastructure at all. The system just sets up stopping points, and there's various logic you can do as to where those are placed and how many of them there are. Or you can say, we want our DRT service just to use fixed existing bus stop infrastructure, or you can have a combination of the two. So you could say in the more urban areas, we want to use normal bus stop infrastructure, and in the more rural areas move to virtual bus stops. You can have a combination. It is very, very configurable to that point. If vehicles are PHV, are they considered to be booked as a whole, or are they viewed as operating at separate fares? Adele, I'm going to give that one to you as well, I'm afraid.
They're separate fares. They are all separate fares. Everybody pays as an individual. You can book as a group, but each person within that group has to be paid for as a separate fare. So if you have 2 people with concessionary passes and one who doesn't, the system wants 2 concessionary pass numbers and 1 payment to book the trip. This picks up, I'm just going to pick up a comment as well that I've seen pop up in the main chat about if it's not registered as a public service vehicle, does it qualify for BSOC? It doesn't. That is a challenge. I think there's a number of things that are open to public service vehicle operators that we haven't been able to take advantage of, or they haven't been able to take advantage of in Milton Keynes because they've operated as private hire. But the model with the smaller vehicles works quite well for us in Milton Keynes.
I think it's worth saying that we are doing quite a bit of work at the moment. I don't think that either PSV or PHV regulation fully works for DRT.
No.
And so I think there's pros and cons to both, frankly, neither are ideal. So we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment to draw what could a more favorable regulatory regime look like for DRT and present that to the DFT. I think they did a future of transport regulatory review a couple of years ago. I think, to be honest, that was probably a little bit early for our sector in terms of, I think we've learned a lot more as to the pros and cons, particularly with services like MK Connect. And so I think we're hopeful that if the DFT wants to see more DRT around the UK, and they say they do, that they'll be open to looking at some of these regulatory changes. Adele, is there any other question you want to take before I close things down? Anything else you've spotted you want to answer?
No, I think I'm good. Although I will just say there's, I'll provide the links to go around with the slides. We do publish some of the data from our public transport, including the MK Connect service on our website. And we recently went to scrutiny with a 6-month review, which is a public document. So there is plenty out there on the Milton Keynes website about what we're doing if people have further questions.
Great. So it only remains for me to say, Adele, thank you very much, as I really appreciate your time and the experience that you've given today. And thank you everyone for joining. As I say, we will follow up with the questions, providing answers to questions we haven't got to. So I'm really sorry for those people who asked a really great set of questions for those ones we haven't got to. And have a lovely day. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.